Welcome to PENSDOWN. This is where we turn the news reporters and news presenters into news makers. On this platform, journalism journeys is the only agenda we have here. Today, I have been joined by a senior colleague. He's the managing editor of Ghana Business News and then executive director of Newsbridge Africa. We are talking his journalism journey. He's also a trainer of journalists. We'll be looking at all that he does, as well as a lot of global investigations he has collaborated and taken part in. So it's a full plate. Just fasten your seatbelt and let's take off. Welcome once again, sir, Mr. Emmanuel K. Dogbevi.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Right. First of all, what brought you into journalism? Was it some childhood ambition? You know, these days when you talk about childhood ambition, you need to be careful because of certain things happening in other places. But was it something you nursed from childhood or it was accidental?
Well, I often say I didn't choose journalism. Journalism chose me.
Wow.
Because of the circumstances that led me to do journalism over the years. So I have a love for text, written text. So as I was growing up, I developed a love for poetry. And so I started writing poems. And I wrote a ton of poems. And at a point, I started looking for a publisher. And I came into contact with the managing editor of a magazine called Step Magazine. And he saw my poems and loved them and decided to publish some of them. So that was when my journalism career and writing career took off.
How long have you been at it since you fell in love with the crafts?
I started writing in 1985. I wrote my very first poem somewhere in 1985 and never stopped writing since then. But my professional career took off in 1990 when I started work at Step Magazine as an editorial intern. That was when I had my poem first published in the magazine, and subsequently I started getting articles published as well. So I would say professionally 33 years, but before 1990, I started writing and publishing poems way back in 1985.
33 good years of doing the same thing over and over again. Does journalism pay?
You don't do journalism because you want to make money. You do journalism because you want to impact your society. I think for most people who go into journalism because they want to make money, they easily get frustrated because there isn't much money to be made in journalism. And that is why you find a lot of unethical behavior among some journalists, because doing just journalism wouldn't make money for you. So they find other unethical ways of making money. And one of the really troubling trends in Ghana is where you find an active editor also owning and running a public relations company. That's extreme. That's the extreme. I mean, going to the extreme, to be honest with you. It's either you want to be a journalist or you want to be a public relations person. You can't do the two at the same time, particularly for someone who works as an editor, also running a public relations business alongside his journal or his or her journalism is very disturbing. It's highly, highly, highly unethical. You cannot serve two masters. You either choose one or choose none at all. I did not go into journalism because I want to make money. I went into journalism because I found journalism to be a very important component of the bigger, wider democratic system and society's well-being, the process of making your society better. And journalism is so important in ensuring that its importance actually is what drives me and not what I make out of journalism.
There is a lot of attrition in the profession. A lot of highly qualified professionals are abandoning the crafts. Public relations is one of the rescue points that is picking a number of them among other areas. From where you sit, what do you think is accounting for this trend?
It's simple. These people didn't enter journalism because they appreciate and value journalism as a profession and what journalism can achieve for a society. Journalism is a calling. It's not like a job or a profession where you enter to make a lot of money. You do journalism because you have the well-being of your society at heart. And you position yourself in the sport to serve the bigger, wider public interest, which often does not bring you financial or material rewards. But ultimately, it's fulfilling. Like for 2 days, I've been thinking about the amount of work I have done in bringing awareness to e-waste dumping in Ghana, for instance. Nobody giving, I've never seen any public official in Ghana give me credit in drawing attention to e-waste dumping. And this dumping was in June 2007. Public knew about e-waste in Ghana. People didn't even know what it meant. And I dare say the EPA wasn't even aware of the fact that Ghana had become a dumping ground for electronics waste until my story came out. And I stayed at it, kept writing and writing, and I've written probably 100 times on e-waste dumping in Ghana. Until in 2016, when Ghana passed the electronic waste management law, and subsequently followed with legislature to set up a tax component, a levy on the importation of electronic gadgets into the country. And eventually, the e-waste fund, National E-Waste Fund, has been set up. I didn't even know about it, right, until I read about it in the news. And to think that a journalist who has dedicated literally more than 10 years of his life working and drawing attention to e-waste dumping in the country, and there is not a single public official anywhere who has acknowledged my work. Additionally, I have seen other reports on e-waste that have actually taken bits and pieces from my work without acknowledging me. I've seen or heard about TV documentaries on e-waste that are largely written based on my works. I was one time out of the country and somebody sent me a message on Facebook saying, look, I'm sitting behind my TV and watching a documentary on this particular station, and they are running a documentary on e-waste. And I can tell because I've read all your articles on e-waste that they copied almost every script from your works, but they haven't acknowledged you. I mean, this is the very unfortunate reality of the situation that journalists find themselves. And I will understand if you work in an environment where your hard work, your sacrifice, your dedication is not financially rewarded, and then you are not also acknowledged, it makes it quite easier for people to leave the profession and move to other fields where even if they don't get acknowledged, they will make money.
What keeps you going in the midst of all these frustrations, some of which you have mentioned? What keeps you going?
What keeps me going? Like I said, money is not my motivation. It's the value that journalism brings to a society and the larger public interest. Mind you, I am a member of this society. Take Ghana. I am a Ghanaian. I was born and bred here. I've lived all my life here. My umbilical cord is buried in this country. I have lived all my life here. My entire foundation is in this country. I have family here. I have friends. I have schoolmates. I have classmates. I have made investments in people's lives over the years. If this country dies, it dies with my dreams. It dies with my aspirations. It dies with all my investments. It affects all the people I love. So as a journalist, my role in bringing attention to the things that are negative or throwing light on things that are positive to serve as a model for other people to emulate leads this country towards an upward direction. It builds this country. And that is for me the motivation to keep doing journalism. Because if this country dies, we all die with it.
Let's look at social media and journalism. You have lived through the years and seen journalism undergo various transformations or phases. How has social media redefined the frontiers of journalism?
Well, basically, the way I see it, social media has not redefined journalism. What social media has done is to provide journalism additional sources or platforms for dissemination of information. Social media has not changed the ethical requirements of journalism. Social media has not changed the fact that you cannot publish a story without verification. It hasn't changed that. And often I've heard people say social media is a threat to journalism. I find that to be quite laughable. It's because journalism is enduring all time. The principles of journalism haven't changed. For instance, I give people this example. If you have watched the gold mafia investigation by Al Jazeera recently, I mean, you cannot use your TikTok video to beat an investigation like that.
That's right.
That's journalism. So you can do all your content on social media if you are not a professional journalist. You can get all the views and the followers, but that will not beat the essence and the integrity of journalism. It's impossible. So social media becomes an expanded platform for journalism to disseminate information. But it does not compete with journalism. You know, social media content is not by professional journalists. And much of the content you find on social media, as interesting as it gets, does not necessarily meet the public interests dictum. And not in any way say social media is competing with journalism.
What is your take on the increasing political ownership of the media? So many politicians, politically exposed persons are setting up media houses. Are we in trouble? Are we caught in trouble? Is our democracy under threat?
I don't need to tell you that. Our democracy is under threat. Our sanity is under threat. Our collective goodwill and public interests are under threat. Political ownership of media in Ghana is a dark side of our media. It's a very, very dark side of our political and democratic system and culture. It's setting us back many, many, many years, in spite of all the hard work that has gone into promoting a democratic culture. The political ownership of media in Ghana is setting us back, it's drawing us back, and it's becoming a danger to our democracy. It's becoming a danger to the health of journalism and the media and progress. Political ownership of media in Ghana has affected the quality of journalism to a large extent. Yes. I have met journalists who tell me, my media owner says we cannot touch this particular subject, irrespective of what angle you are doing. The owner says, don't touch this particular subject. And you would meet reporters who tell you that my editor has warned me, or my manager has warned me that we should never touch a story by, affecting this particular company, or we should not report a story against this particular political party or government. And often the mantra you hear from political players in this country, particularly those in office or in power, is that some journalists are working to make their governments unpopular. If you report or reported on, they claim that you are making their government unpopular. So what it means is that those who own media are dictating to the journalists who work in their media organizations what they should publish. And that is dangerous. That is setting us back. If you look at all the efforts and investment that has been made in building our democratic system in the last 32 or 30 odd years.
Beyond the shores of Ghana, you have pedigree, you have clout, you enjoy plaudits from very notable members of the fraternity and also institutions. You have been part of international investigations like the West African League and the FinCEN files and those things. Give us an idea. In collaborating with, in those investigations, what exactly was your role? Were you neck deep in it, or you served as some sort of a final check on some of the facts to be sure that things were properly tidied up before they came to public?
Well, to start, the first I've been working on collaborations before West Africa Leaks in various forms. But West Africa Leaks gave me an opportunity to dig deep into files like Panama Papers, offshore leaks, Swiss leaks, Paradise Papers, and so on and so forth. I would say I was quite a major part of West Africa Leaks because before we do projects like that, we meet and run a training for a day or two while we giving access to the leaked documents and so on and so forth. And of course, I did play a very important role in advising my colleagues and sharing ideas, sharing knowledge, and sharing my thoughts. And I worked as the Ghana journalist in West Africa Leaks. There were about 13 journalists from 14 West African countries who worked on West Africa Leaks. And I worked on the Ghana story. And I've received a lot of feedback about, the depth of the story, the quality of the story, the fact that the story covered all the angles. And I must say that the subject in the story got his lawyers to write to ICIJ and Al Jazeera, because Al Jazeera did a documentary on the project. But of course, interestingly enough, he did not send me a warning from his lawyers. But of course, we responded to those queries to the lawyers, and we haven't heard anything from them. And then, of course, I worked on Vincent Piles as the Ghana reporter, and I worked on the Ghana story. So in these collaborations, each journalist in every country where information is available in the leaks looks for stories from his country and works on them. So I worked on 5 gold exporting companies on Vincent Piles. And then, of course, I also worked on Pandora Papers, and I worked on Amandi, which is a company owned by some Israelis. But it's not an Israeli company because it's registered in the British Virgin Islands. And then, of course, recently I have worked on Shadow Diplomats as well. But of course, apart from these, I have worked on a collaboration with Finance Uncovered. Finance Uncovered is a London-based financial investigative journalism organization. So I have done some work with them. And I have done a number of other collaborations where I have published the work done by journalists in other countries, like in South Africa, in Kenya, in Namibia, as well as in Cameroon. So collaborations in various forms, apart from being neck deep in the investigation itself, I've also worked as a collaborator in terms of publishing works by journalists in other countries. And then, of course, I also mentor journalists in other countries to do investigations across Africa. So collaboration in all the forms and various forms, I've had the privilege of being involved in.
You've done 33 years. If we are to roll back the hands of time, 40 years, are you still going to take journalism?
Maybe yes. I would definitely love to do journalism again. But as to whether I would love to do journalism in Ghana is another question. I am not too sure I would love to do journalism in Ghana if I have to turn back the hand of time. Ghana has consistently not been very motivating for journalism. What keeps me going is the public interest and the value that journalism itself brings to our democracy and the well-being of our society. If I was to do this purely for the money, I probably would have been I am probably one broke journalist you will find anywhere in Ghana. But the love for country keeps me going. And often one question I ask myself is, if I don't do this story, who else will do it? And it's a fact. I mean, if you see the stories I do, nobody else would do stories like that. Or nobody would follow on subjects like that, as it were. And that makes my part in doing journalism quite important and necessary for the overall well-being and health of Ghana's democracy.
In the line of duty, how many times were you approved, or have you been approved with anything monetary or material to compromise the facts of any story you were working on?
Well, I think before people come to you, they probably talk to other people who know you.
That's right.
And people who know me would always, tell them, you can't bribe this guy.
It's a no-go area.
They try and come because they believe everybody has a price. Nobody has openly approached me to say they want to give me money. But I can tell that they come and expect me to to say, okay, pay, and I do this or I do that. I mean, nobody has openly come to me to say, okay, how much do you want?
Yeah.
But they'll come and say, is there anything we can do? You know? Tell me, what's the process?
Yes.
Is there anything you can do? And I'm like, the only thing you can do is to give me your side of the story.
That's right.
So I have never been approached. But honestly, in my case, I have rather been dealt with more punitive measures rather than, persuasive approach. So they withdraw advertising. They don't give me sponsorship
to starve you.
Yes. They cut me off even from receiving press releases. I can't count how many editors forum have been held in Ghana, and I never get invited. Journalists get invited to go on tours around the country, and I am completely neglected. Sometimes I don't know if it is deliberate or they simply don't think that I need to be there, or they are not aware of my existence. So for me, it's more of the denial of what you might consider favors, which has been going on for many years now. And trust me, I've become very used to it. It doesn't bother me because while most Ghanaian organizations avoid me, a lot of international organizations very happily deal with me.
What are your golden memories? These almost 35 years you've held your pen. You are a decorated pen man. Share with us your golden memories.
My golden memories, I'll say, was when I was given the night budget fellowship at Columbia University. I always call it the pinnacle of my profession. It was the highest point of my career. Considering my background, I never went to secondary school. I literally taught myself to write, actually. I never went to journalism school before I started journalism. Indeed, I never even went to university before I started journalism. I started journalism long before I went to university. I first went to university in 1999. And I had to study on my own to write my GC to qualify for university. So getting the fellowship to go to Columbia, where my full tuition was paid, and I was given $55,000 spending money, and a huge opportunity to learn at Columbia University is and has always remained the pinnacle of my profession. That's my golden experience, my golden memory. And then, of course, last year in October, I also became a joint winner of the 2022 Christopher J. Wells Memorial Prize, which acknowledges excellence in business journalism. And in all instances, I became the first Ghanaian. I became the first Ghanaian journalist to be awarded the Knight Badgers Fellowship after 40 years of the fellowship with over 400 fellows. Wow. And then I became the first Ghanaian and probably the second African to have won the Christopher J. Wells Memorial Prize. That is a huge plus for my efforts, as it were. So these are some of the golden years. And I must say to you also that some of my most comforting experiences as a journalist is when I get the chance to talk to my colleague investigative journalists in other countries. And I get the chance to do that every day, all the time. I have friends in Cameroon, Nigeria, in the US, in the UK, Eastern Europe, in the Middle East. And we talk all the time. And talking to these people gives me a lot of motivation, gives me a lot of joy. We support each other. We encourage each other. We motivate each other. We talk and chat and find ways we can do collaborations. So these are my golden memories and experiences. And of course, each time I finish and publish an investigation, it's a golden experience and therefore becomes a memory.
You are a trainer of journalists as well across the sub-region. You've trained quite a number of them, mentored many as well. Let me put you on the spot as far as the case of Ghana is concerned. From your interfacing with journalists, interacting with them, even having some work under you, supervise them, what would you say is your assessment of the quality of journalism in Ghana today? Maybe you can do an extension to West Africa.
Overall, the quality of journalism could be better, and that's my motivation for doing training and for taking on interns. And I can say on authority that every intern that has passed through my hands goes out much, much better. My very first intern, unfortunately, didn't stay in journalism, has moved to public relations and has taken all the lessons he's learned under me into public relations. And he's very highly ethical, very professional, and has been excelling and works with one of the biggest PR companies in Ghana. I've had a few other student journalists pass through my hands. And in fact, other people who have done other studies like IT and so on, who have passed through the training at Ghana Business News and Newsbreed Africa, and have improved their character to work, their attitude to service. And there was this young lady who worked with a radio station for 5 years and never wrote a significant story, but joined me for a year to do an internship and ended up writing an award-winning article, you know. So people who pass through my hands end up better and doing well. They get motivated because they pick the right steps, they learn the right attitude, they learn the right principles to practice in journalism. But of course, most of them also who come to my training and work with media organizations whose interests is not fundamentally good quality journalism, have problems because they want to apply what they have learned, but their media houses are not interested. But somehow, they try to find ways to improve the work they do. And honestly speaking, most of the young journalists who have come closer to me and are willing to learn and ready to learn have improved. And some of them are doing very, very well, not only in Ghana, but across Africa.
What's your take on Solly?
What's my take on
Solly?
The popular and infamous Solly. I think, unfortunately, because of the nature of journalism in Ghana, where people, organizations want to be seen in a positive light, they tend to believe that having a positive image of yourself in the media helps. And it also does help to some extent because most Ghanaians love to see you talked about in the media. And a lot of organizations and people want to see themselves talked about in the media. And sadly, our media organizations are very starved of funding, and they do not have enough resources to invest in independent work. Independent journalism costs a lot of money. You need time, resources. The journalists will have to be on a beat for longer than necessary to produce good quality stories. And most of these media organizations are radio and TV stations. They don't do programming, so they are not able to have programs running consistently. They depend on the touch and go type of stories. And therefore, they have to continue to develop. They therefore develop the habit of continuing to report on, on events and seminars and programs and so on and so forth. So corporate organizations and individuals have seen a loophole that they think they can fill in. So in order to get favorable coverage, they invite the media and say, we are inviting you to cover a workshop, to cover a seminar, to cover a press conference. And once you go there, they facilitate your transportation. And most journalists are not paid, and most are also underpaid. While that is no good excuse, most of these reporters have found that as a means of survival, unfortunately, and they are getting hooked to it. So I did say that someone said 90% of the news in the Ghanaian media is public relations. It might sound like an exaggeration, but if you do a serious content analysis, you are likely to find that it's much more than 90. It might be much more than 90% of the content that is public relations. So that culture has been developed over the years, and most journalists are hooked to it. So you invite them to an event, their media houses may not give them transportation. So they expect that whoever is inviting them for the event must pay their transport. So the journalist comes, he does not have money for transport, and he expects you to pay his transport. And often when people pay your transport, they expect you to definitely write the story. Some may invite you to a program, and then they will invite you to lunch. And then they'll start calling you to say, where is my story? And most of them don't understand that even though a journalist comes to your event, the publication reserves the editorial rights as to whether you think your story is worth publishing or not. The reporter may write the story, the editor might not find it newsworthy for his publication and might not publish it. Or you might invite a reporter to an event, and after the event, the reporter might decide that I didn't find anything newsworthy at your event. They may go and not write it. I have even been invited outside the country to events where I sit in meetings and listen, and there is no story to write. It's just a repetition of what people have said at other meetings, and we have reported over and over and over, and there is no new angle to it. So you invite me to an event like that, I am unable to report. And so I come back and I don't have a story to write. So if you give me transport and you insist that because you have given me transportation or solid, and therefore I must report on your event, even though editorially I do not find it newsworthy, that is unfortunately an uncomfortable situation and must be discouraged, as it were. Journalists should not be compelled to go to your event if they don't find it newsworthy.
One of the benefits that social media brought or has brought to journalism is that it will help accentuate our work, amplify the kind of work we do by serving as an extra platform for reaching the masses. Now, one observation I have made is that the platform has created richer bloggers than richer journalists. Is there something we missed out as journalists, which is why we couldn't exact the financial benefits of the platform to our advantage individually?
Well, journalists are doing hardcore news, right? Hardcore news serves the public interest. But probably bloggers are serving the interest or what the public is interested in. They are two different things.
That's right.
What the public is interested in and what the public interest is are not the same. The public is interested in salacious information. The public is interested in gossip. The public is interested in sensationalism. Journalism does not serve these interests. So if bloggers are serving sensational interests of the public will fall for it. So I may do a very solid story and share on social media. I may get 10 people reacting to it. But the blogger might post something else and he will get 100 people reacting to it because it is salacious. It tickles their fancy. So that's the difference, But journalism has a long-term serving interest. It's enduring. Social media, a blogger may do something that will capture a big crowd today, but how does that change the life of the public? But a journalist may do something that the public may not show interest in, but it will change a lot of lives. My stories on e-waste, for instance, never have a large following. But eventually Ghana has passed an e-waste law. And now we have the e-waste fund, National e-waste fund. These are huge landmarks in terms of impact of the work I have done in e-waste. But I don't know how many Ghanaians even know that I have done some work on e-waste. So popularity of a content does not necessarily determine the quality of the content. And journalists focus on the public interest, and they focus on good quality. That meets all the standard of journalism.
There are calls on this platform that journalists should be licensed. Will you support such calls? Licensing of journalists?
Well, recently at the World Press Freedom Day event at the University of Cape Coast, a professor got up and made that statement and said, if lawyers and teachers are licensed, why doctors are licensed, why are journalists not licensed? You know, when you start to tread that path, you are treading a very dangerous path, because journalism is connected to free expression. And are you going to license everybody who wants to express themselves? That's the question. If you license journalists, you're actually licensing free press, free expression. And free expression is guaranteed by the Constitution, you know, and that is why we have a media law, we have defamation laws, we have ethics of journalism. And journalists are required to play by the rule, to play by the game. If any journalist defames you, you can sue him. There are laws on defamation, you know. So the fact that there are no licensing of journalists does not mean that journalists are free to publish defamatory content about anybody. If you do that, you expose yourself to legal suits. And the ethics of journalism does not encourage journalists to be reckless and irresponsible. You know, so journalists are required to publish hard facts, but they must do that within, you know, the rules of engagement, which requires that you cannot publish unfair, you know, and subjective, unverified information, particularly severe allegations that damage people's reputation without verifying and establishing the facts. So licensing journalists would not save the problem. People think when you license journalists, then what? There are doctors who are killing people every day. There are doctors who are unethical. There are teachers who are inefficient, incompetent. There are licensed nurses who are not being professional. There are licensed midwives who are not doing their work well. So licensing will not solve any problem.
Indeed, and even licensed drivers that are killing on the highway.
And there are licensed drivers who are killing people on the roads every day. So licensing journalism or journalists will not solve the problem you seek to solve. What we need to do is to empower journalists by more and more good quality training. I have heard so many times people say in this country that, oh, we have trained journalists so many times, but they are not changing. But if you look at the content of some of those training, it's abysmal. Those training do not empower journalists or equip them in any best effective way to do their jobs. For instance, I'll give you an example. You go to a financial reporting training of journalists, and instead of, you know, the organizers getting a journalist who has done economic or financial reporting for many years and has a good track record and examples of good quality financial reporting to show, to come and do the training, they will go and invite an economist. An economist will only come and teach the journalist economic principles and theories. He does not have the journalism of economics to teach them. But the economic and financial journalists need to be taught how to do financial reporting. And that can only be taught by somebody who has done it and has got the knowledge and experience. And that's the mistake we make. We invite medical doctors to come and teach health reporting. He will teach them medicine or medical knowledge. He does not teach them health reporting. He's not a health journalist. And that's the problem. So we are training journalists, but we are using the right resources to train them. So no matter how much of these kinds of training we do, the journalists still never get better. And the difference is often when I organize training on subjects and I teach the journalists, they go out better because I teach them what is done on the field and not what some technocrat think they should do. Because he's not a journalist. He does not know how journalists work. And that's the problem.
Why was business journalism a choice for you and no other?
Well, why I got into business journalism is because at the time, of course, before I started Ghana Business News,
yes,
I had gone to a business plan competition organized by this organization, TechnoServe.
Okay.
Sometime I think in 2007, the competition was called Believe, Begin, Become.
Okay.
And as part of the competition, when you go through the first stage, the second stage, you will go through some training. It was kind of a mini MBA. Wow. And during the training, you are supposed to develop a business plan. And as part of your business plan, developing your business plan, you have to do research. So we started looking for information. My colleagues who were doing something on agri were looking for information on agriculture, IT. And it was difficult to find online. You can't find information. Our business reporters were not doing hardcore reporting on businesses, so you couldn't find information on businesses. And after the program, what struck me was, okay, why don't I make part of my business plan by broadband internet in those? So I actually took part and extras of that and did a very interesting article on the cost of internet in Ghana way back in 2007. And I got a lot of feedback. So that's how my interest in business journalism was deepened. But of course, before then, I had a lot of interest in the Central Bank. I had interest in the World Bank. I had interest in the African Development Bank, Economic Commission for Africa, and the IMF, and so on and so on.
Maybe my last question. Has your life come under threat in the line of duty these more than 30 years?
Well, not directly. I've been threatened a couple of times with legal suits. I have been threatened while covering an election in 2020. I have not received direct threats, but I have been told by people in other countries about how a story I did ruffles some people, and they wanted to travel all the way. I have not received direct threats, but I have received attacks, online attacks. There have been efforts to break into my phone, to break into my email system, all kinds of attacks. I get them every day. My website receives lots and lots of brute force attacks. The last time I checked the data, I was stunned. Tens of thousands of attacks in a day, trying to break into my website. I have been approached by people asking me to take down stories about them on the website, and I refuse. I don't know how they feel after or about that after I refuse. But I have fortunately not received a direct attack or threats to my life. But that is not to say I am a potential target for such attacks, except that probably my journalism is such that it's difficult for people to punch holes in my work. Excuse me. And I've heard people say, oh, Emmanuel is very professional. So even if you are not happy with my work, you cannot find malice. You cannot easily point to say, oh, yeah, this is a malicious story. I pay attention to detail. I'm exceptionally and extremely very careful. I go extra length to double check information, to cross check and double check and verify my facts. And I always give whoever I'm writing about the right to reply. I don't publish a story before you respond. I always will write to you to tell you I'm writing a story about you. What do you have to say about it? And because of that, I think people don't feel that I am attacking them. And often some journalists will tell you that people call them and ask them, who is paying you to write about me? I once received a text message from a former employee of a mobile phone company asking me if I'm a financial analyst and what was my interest in the story I was doing about the telecoms company. Because when I start a story, I don't stop. I do lots and lots of follow-up. I don't break the major story and go to sleep. I always do follow-up. So I broke a story about tax avoidance by this major telecoms company, and I didn't stop. I kept going at it. And this guy didn't like it. So I think after the third or fourth story, he sent me a WhatsApp message and asks me, am I a financial analyst and what my interest in the story was? Of course, I'm a journalist. I did not respond to that WhatsApp. I'm a journalist, and I'm required to follow up on stories, and that's just what I'm doing. And usually that's why you see Ghanaians journalists who break a story once and never do a follow-up because they don't want to be attacked and told that they are serving somebody's interest or they have a personal interest in the story.
There is a disturbing observation I have made. At the training institutions, Ghana Institute of Journalism, for instance.
I thought that was your final question.
It just came up. You pardon me and oblige me this last one, if you may.
Go ahead.
Yes. So as I was saying, Ghana Institute of Journalism, for instance, I monitor their social media page for a lot. When admissions come, I check public relations admissions against journalism. And sometimes the public relations numbers is about 4 times that of those going to read journalism. Is this profession dying?
Yeah.
Is there a future for the profession? Why the consistent dwindling interest in journalism?
Well, I will say, the sad reality is that the Ghanaian public has failed to see the value and importance of journalism. And let me say this and be clear about it. If journalism dies, our democracy dies, and with it, our freedoms. And journalism is going the way it's going because the public hasn't seen the value. And the public does not support journalism as it should. Journalists are not serving their own interest. They are serving the public interest. So if the public does not support, encourage, and motivate journalists, this is what it's going to happen. A lot more people will switch off to public relations. But journalism will not die. There will always be dedicated journalists who will do their work. But the public will suffer. The public will suffer because there are stories in the public interest very soon most journalists will not do. And I have met journalists who will tell me, look, I'm not going to bother myself to do a story like this because even if I do it, nobody shows interest or nobody would show it. And so they don't bother themselves. A journalist goes to do a story and gets into trouble. And the public bashes him. Sometimes your own colleague journalist will bash you. Yeah. The journalist gets demotivated and he stops following important stories. I know a lot of journalists who have become social media personality. Yes, they now focus on pathetic stories. They become fundraisers for people who are sick, who need money to pay their medical bills. One time I also had to raise funds to pay somebody's school fees, to buy books for somebody who has got admission to go to secondary school. And most journalists are doing this and people are applauding them. it's become an easy way to fame, and they are loving it. So people call them, you're a good person, and da 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 da. So instead of going to do a story that will put him in trouble, that public would not support him or her, they are doing this public interest, not public interest, stories of disadvantaged people, people who are hungry and they need food, people who need a place to stay and they can't pay for rent. A journalist would go on air and talk about their problem, and people will run and donate, and the journalist will go and donate with cameras and post on social media, and people will say, oh, you are doing great. These are the kind of journalists we want. But that's not journalism. I always tell journalists that, look, you don't go and publish the story of a poor man and win sympathy for him. You must tackle the root of poverty, which is bad governance, mismanagement, corruption, embezzlement of public funds. That's the role of journalists. If there are human rights abuses, journalists should report them. But journalists focusing on raising funds for one or two poor people, you are not doing much. Change the system, focus on the system, let the system change. If you let the system change, the system will take care of its poor. But it's like a quick fix. We raise funds for one poor man and we get applauded, we go to the next poor man. But if we tackle the root of their poverty, maybe 10 poor men would be helped at a go. And that is a much impactful approach to dealing with poverty than using the unprofessional means. Because you are a journalist and you have popularity, you use your popularity to raise funds for poor people, and then you don't talk about the cause of their poverty. Corruption is affecting more poorer people and creating more poor people than we can. So journalists should focus on the thieves, the corrupt public officials who are misappropriating public funds, and throw the light on them and shine a light on their activities and expose them and demand accountability and insist that the law takes its course. Such people should face the full rigors of the law and be taken through due process. And in as much as possible as the law requires, they should be made to pay back the stolen funds, and the funds should be appropriately used for the right reasons for which they were initially released. That way you build your society rather than saving one poor man at a time. How many poor people can you save anyway?
Let me put the brakes here, sir. Thank you very much for this one. It's been insightful.
Thank you.
A lot to learn and a lot to digest within this 40-something minutes we've had this interaction. I'm truly grateful for your time. Emmanuel K. Dogbevi is the managing editor for Ghana Business News and the executive director of Newsbridge Africa, a decorated investigative journalist whose cloud goes beyond the shores of Ghana, where he is resident and he is a citizen. This has been PENSDOWN. Thanks for joining us. Here we talk journalism journeys. We'll be back next time with another colleague, and we'll be talking your journalism journey. Bye for now.